So you might, there we go. Right. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. We're going to do the presentation from the dive show. And just to double check, because I've been having a really bad day, am I sharing the right screen with the slides on it? On
Yeah.
Somebody give me a thumb up. Okay. All right, cool. Okay, so I set this presentation up to run it through the dive show, and I'm going to try and run it the same way I did. We'll see how it goes. Okay, so everybody knows we went over to Norway with Nick Pfeiffer last November, and it was a big surprise to me. Concentrating on my photography for 1 week to try and photograph whales was something I had never, ever tried to do before. I never went on other than a hike with Diarmid up to the Doolin and stuff like that. Never really concentrated that much time on my photography. Now I put this picture in first because I wanted to include the fact that it's really difficult to take pictures in Norway because there's only a couple of hours of light every single day, right? So the very first day, I actually only got about 9 photographs. The second day, I got about 1,000, right? But most of them look like this. They were really bleak because I didn't really know when peak was or golden hour or when was the best time to shoot. I was just stunned that I could actually see a fin in the water on a regular basis. And there must be, like, if I have one picture of a fin, there's 25 of it. It's ridiculous. So I had to do a lot of deleting. But a couple of minutes into our first day's trip out in the water, it was actually my GoPro that I used. And I got this little video, which I think I shared from Norway. And all I did was take the GoPro on a stick, shove it in the water off the side of the boat, upside down, and hope for the best. And that was it, right? But that moment made my trip. That moment, I said, there's something to be seen here, right? It actually is possible, like day 1, day 2 of the trip. And then a couple of times I got clever with the light, and there actually was some decent light. So this is what morning looked like quite often. I don't know if I mentioned this at the dive show, but I didn't see the sun except for, like, physically see the sun except for once in a week, and it was for 10 seconds. It basically came up high enough to peek over the brow of one of those mountains, and then I turned around to get the camera on the boat to take a photograph of it because I knew it was rare, and it dropped back down again. It disappeared. So I never actually got any shot with the actual sun in the picture.
What?
But I did get a few good orca shots, right? They were plentiful. There were a lot of boats out there trying to do exactly what we were doing. We were in one of the hardtop boats. We'll take a look at it later, but there were a lot of ribs, and you see how they had people really packed in. These are short day trips. So if you ever go to Norway, where we went, it is possible. I'd say it's not cheap. I think somebody told me it was a couple of $100 per hour. But you can get on one of these boats and they'll kit you with the, you know, with the suit, the head to toe suit, the lifesaver suit, one that Vanessa loaned me for the trip. And, you know, you can get out there and you get very close to them. So one thing you were trying to get, and I didn't do a perfect job of it at all, but you're trying to get the reflection of the sun on the fin with the wetness of the water, right? That was something I was going for there. Kind of got a bit of it on this shot, so I put that one in. I have the settings up in the upper end right, if anybody cares about that. My ISO was up quite high, not a lot of light, so ISO 1600. I'd normally shoot 100. My f-stop was f5, and my speed was 1.640. I was using a lens that I don't own. I borrowed it from Diarmid O'Donovan, another plug for Diarmid. He has a 150 to 600 that you can zoom in. It's like a Canon. And I use that for a lot of my top shots. another one of the perspective shots. And also I wanted to show that that's the village we started from every morning. That's Chervoy, right? In the background there. So we didn't really have to go very far. That was one thing about the trip, was we were paying for the cost of our own fuel, which would be even more expensive now. But you know, I kind of thought we were going to have to spend a lot more and travel further, but we didn't. We're always quite close to where they were. When you saw one orca, you saw a family of orcas. They were always kind of traveling together. There's the bull, and there's the mama, and a couple of, maybe a baby, and then I don't know, the cousins and the aunts and the uncles. I don't know, but they all hang out together, and you can get a nice grouping of them at times. Before I went on the trip, someone asked me, "Are you not afraid that an orca is going to eat you, right, or take a bite out of you?" And I did think about it a lot a couple of weeks before the trip. As closer I got to traveling, the more I was like, am I crazy? Is this dangerous? I didn't do any Googling to see what's the rate of shark attack or orca attack, but I thought this shot was good, and I wanted to share it early because I really felt like this orca turned and looked at me. Now, when I was in the water, I didn't notice it, right? But I have a series of shots where he actually turns, he or she turns their head and looks at me, right? So I thought that was worth, they do notice you, even though you think they don't. A lot of times you're trying to capture on the top shot certain things that the orcas do. They have this thing where they spy hop and they just put their head out of the water and they kind of look at you and see what's going around. Other times, obviously, they're jumping and diving. And then there's the babies, and you're trying to actually find a baby. Quite hard to get them to, you know, in a specific moment, right? They are moving all the time. So I was quite happy I got a lot of sharp shots anyway, even if they weren't perfect. 1/640 was my speed, so that's probably why a lot of them were sharp. I kept that up. There is an example of a kind of baby. Now, I don't actually know, I don't think there's the baby's spy hopping there. I think it's moving and jumping, right? If they were spy hopping, they'd just be stopped. And I just happened to catch that baby. You can see on the bottom side of it, it's kind of orangey in color, so it's not too old. And also there's markings around the neck. And like, if you were to ask a local in Norway about this particular baby, they would tell you its name or its number. Like, they're very, very familiar, and they're all kind of all over the area, and they track and tag these things. And they would actually know exactly what that one, because it's a unique kind of I'd say it's like a birthmark for the baby. So rather than show you my 1,000 photos, I promise you I'm not doing that. There's only about 60 in this presentation, but I wanted to capture the fact that when I took a shot, I was taking a lot of shots, right? So somebody spots an orca, if you're not already in the water, you're slipping your leg over the side of the boat and finning as fast as you can towards them. I got lucky on one particular occasion, and a baby and mama, I think, were together. And this is basically what the movement looked like. And there's a couple of shots before this first shot on the upper left, but that's the very end, right? I'm finning as fast as I can to get to them. And that was as close as I could get. My favorite shot is the upper left one. However, I'm pointed down, right? And I haven't mentioned this yet, but there's no strobes, right? At all. It's all natural light. You don't want to disturb the orcas. So it's kind of best practice not to. And Nick warned us ahead of time, don't even pack them, lads. Don't even bring them. So everything was natural light. So the closer you can get them to the surface, the brighter. But then they don't necessarily want to go near you, right? So you might not see them. Hi, Joan.
Hello, Mike.
So when I zoom into that picture, it doesn't look too great on the presentation. So this one came out pretty good. I have a little black and white of a little family, and the baby happened to be on this side. So this one, I think, was, when I got it, I knew I got it, and I was really, really delighted. It was actually quite later in the evening as well. My settings, I had to bump up the ISO, so I went up to 4,000. The aperture is quite low. I could have gone lower, But one thing I didn't want to go lower on is that speed, that 1/100. That's my 16 mil. That's my normal wide angle that I would use on all my diving in Ireland and stuff like that. And this really worked out really well for me. This is the Sony on the Sony lens on the Sony mirrorless that I use. So I think it worked out all right. This was the face I made afterwards. I leaned back. It was a couple of days into the trip. I had been in the water at least 2 hours, and I hadn't been very successful. They kept getting away from me, and I got that shot with the family, and I said, "That's it. I did it right. That completed. I felt like my set of orca shots that I wanted." For some reason, somebody likes this shot, so I kept it in. I think it's pretty good, black and white, a bit grainy maybe, but the two of them are breathing in unison. So I don't know, some people like that one. That's again with Dearman's lens, not zoomed in too much. So besides orcas, there were also other whales there, and I fell in love with these guys. These were the humpbacks. I went to see the orcas, but the humpbacks just blew me away. And we had one whole day really where we got lucky and got in the water, and they weren't very far away. Now they're huge and they look like they're going to move slow, but they actually can travel quite quickly when they want to. The behavior of the whales is kind of, they show themselves for a very brief period of time, and then they dive and appear somewhere else completely. So if you can get yourself in the water close enough to them, and it's bright enough, you know, you'll be pretty lucky. And you can see it's quite dark there. The ISO is all the way up at 6400, which was my max for the trip. I didn't go beyond that. I think maybe I could have dropped my aperture a bit, but I was worried that if I didn't have my aperture low enough, that I wouldn't, like the whale, I wouldn't capture it all in focus. I'd have too much blur. If I was to take this shot again, I would push it and drop it way down to f2.8 or something like that. I believe this is the same scene, the same whale. I have about, well, actually it's the next slide. I have a bunch of shots together where he's diving. This is quite grainy, right? It was very dark, but that's what it looks like before I turn it black and white. So that's the kind of natural light color that's there. And you can see they kind of move quite a bit. So like I said, the behavior you're looking for is kind of this first arc, and then a second arc, and then the third arc, there's always a tail. They do it every single time. It's always the same. They might not do it at the exact same time as each other, but every whale does this. And we spent a whole day just following them when they were traveling. It's really not possible to kind of get in the water when they're moving like that. They're just so fast, they would pass you by. You kind of need them feeding, right? So we'll take a look at that later. And here's one of them. I don't know how I got this one diving, but I guess I got lucky to get that. All right, so we said we'd start the presentation by Martin's recommendation with a bunch of photos. We didn't want to deny them, right? He gave me that advice before the dive show. I said, where should I start? Should I tell him how I got there first and make him wait, or should I show him the photos first? So I'm going to do more photos later, but a little bit about the trip. I caught the bus at the Hurlers, Dublin Airport, and then Dublin to Oslo, Oslo to Tromsø. And then we had to stay overnight because it took that long to get that north. And then from there, you have two choices, ferry or car. The ferry didn't suit the times, so we got in a car, and we thought it was going to be easy enough. But actually, the person who collected us, right, drove all the way from Cherbourg to collect us. I didn't realize that. There wasn't a taxi from Tromsø to Cherbourg. They were actually from the fishing village, came and collected us. So as bad as the journey was for us, it was all day. It was about 5 or 6 hours. That person made it twice, right? So I feel quite lucky. It wasn't cheap either. The reason it's difficult is on the right, you can see they've only got one way to get there, and it's a tunnel, and they're still digging it, right? So we got we were getting there, and we thought it was only going to be a couple of hours because that's what Google Maps said, right? Well, it'd only be a couple of hours, and we like 2 hours would go, and we would look at Google Maps, and we were still 2 hours away from the damn place. And then at one point he stopped and he says, "We're going to have a break," and we're like, "No, we don't want a break." And he says, "Oh, we have to break. Go into the shop there and relax because the tunnel's not open. It's only open a couple of times a day because they're digging it the rest of the time. And then, of course, it's only one way. So you've really only got one shot when you're driving to get there, and you have to time it exactly right." So if I was to do it again, I will go for the ferry. And on our way home, we took a fast ferry, and it only took 2 hours by the fast ferry, and it was brilliant. It was like leather seats and TVs, and I highly recommend it. I mentioned about the light, so I said I'd cap this. I didn't have it at the dive show, so I said I'd add this. We were basically there in November, so where I have the kind of slider with the lock all the way to the right there, that kind of shows you at the very top is the daylight, right, that we had. And by the end of that week and the last week, I think they had even less light. So Nick had kind of organized that 3 weeks. He books it every year for 3 weeks. The first week was his own trip. The second week I joined, and then he had the third closing week. And then that was it. He closed up shop and came home. But by that last night, there was very, very, very daylight at all, right? So Norway's an interesting place. They never turn the electricity off. I don't know, is it free to their people? Because I think it must be, because day, night, all the time. And it's actually to fight depression, because there is such a lack of daylight, right? It really kind of gets you to, I mean, at 1:30 in the day, we were night fishing, right? For our dinner. And then you had the rest of the day to kind of think about your next day's photography or whatever you were going to do. There wasn't a heck of a lot to do except fish and gut fish. But it was a beautiful place. When it was lit, this is what it looked like. So we stayed in this fish camp. Down there by the water's edge on the left, you see the little house that we would walk out to, and then the dock. The fish camp house came with a boat. So one of those boats goes to every house, and we had the use of one of those boats for ourselves. So we had to coxswain it, navigate it, do all the safety with it, and also jump off it and get in there with the orcas. But we lived on that boat for the daytime for a good few hours. Over to the left is where the village is, and I have kind of a short drone video. So that's the house, and I'm in front of it. And it's going to pan to the right here, and you can see the village. So everything's surrounded by mountains everywhere, right? And a lot of times we did a tour of the mountains near there. Nick took us up for a while. It was a nice long drive with the boat. But a lot of times there's little villages, there's only one or two houses, and their backyard literally is the mountain going straight up. You know what I mean? You can see it kind of down there. But Chervoy is quite large, even though it's all walkable. That whole village there, we walked it. There's one hotel, there's one coffee shop, and there's one place to buy groceries, right? And that's it. The rest is people supporting, I guess, the industry. This is that same place at night. Now I have one of Dearman's lenses here, another 1.8 aperture lens, and I have it set for a couple of minutes. So if you can see, Nick wouldn't stand still, so he's kind of blurring behind me there. But that's actually nighttime, right? It's actually pitch black. I just have the lens open for so long. So this is what the walk looked like every morning. We had to wear crampons to get to the boat, and then you had to take them off before you got on the boat because you didn't want to put a hole in the boat. But that's what it looked like. In the morning, again, when you're starting out, you're basically starting in almost like no light. This was probably kind of more of an afternoon shot, but this is mostly what Captain Nick was doing. He's been doing this for a good few years, right? Over 8 years, I think. So he knows a lot of the local guys who go there every year for the herring hunt to see this stuff. And they're in constant communication. Where are you today? Where are you going to try? I might go up here. Give me a shout later. You know, and keeping track of all the data that's out there with the fishing boats. So we could see the big processing boats. We could see the smaller fishing boats. We kind of had a rough idea, and Nick would just kind of, based on that, chart a path for us every morning, right? That was our dive plan. And this is kind of what the inside of the boat looked like. There was only ever 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of us on the boat, right? So you could have somebody up front, somebody on the left, somebody driving, and you know, somebody at the back. Sometimes there was only 4 of us. I think that was the least. One day there was only 3 of us on the boat. So we all were coxswains. We could all kind of alternate duties. But to be fair, I have to give it to Nick. He did most of the driving most of the time. He wanted to make sure that we got in the water, to the point where one day we just kind of said, that's it, you got to get in now, you know. I have a shot of him later. So this is the area around where we were. Chervoy is there on the left. We did a lot of our fishing over by Hackstein, this really small island just next to Chervoy there. Like almost all our actual fishing was done there. But over by Hackøy and beyond was where, and in between Chervoy and Hackøy, that's where we caught most of our shots, photography and orcas. There's a lot of different kinds of orcas around. So in the fish camp, they had, you know, a lot of signage up, a lot of information. People that come there all year round for the fishing, but they also come to see the whales, and lots of different types of whales. It was mostly, I think, just humpback that we saw while we were there. There might have been I don't want to say because I can't remember, and I don't want to get it wrong. So what gear did we have to bring? You needed to have some light, so a headlamp was always good. You better have a hat. It's cold. That's probably obvious. We wear them in Ireland anyway when we go out on the rib. You need, on the left there, you need a survival suit. What we used, Nick had a few Fladdens that he had. So if it fit, it was perfect. I spent most of my time in my spearfishing suit, right? So it's not a semi-dry, it's not a wetsuit. It's the kind that you have to lube up. So the top bottle there in the middle is the lube, you know, yourself, horse lube or whatever, but you got to use a lot more of it to get these suits on. They are like a second skin, about 8 mil, right? I was never cold in the water at all. When you got out and you were waiting around and the boat was driving, with a bit of wind, you might get cold. So you put the survival suit on over top of that. Weight-wise, we actually had to bring our own weight, which was interesting at the airport. They wanted to scan my lead to make sure there were no drugs in it. But since there were 2 of us together and we were a bit chatty, we got through okay. I used a rubber weight belt with my weights. That's kind of a spearfishing thing rather than a diving thing. It's a little bit more comfortable. Obviously, I didn't wear any gloves in the water, actually. I had them, but I didn't bother using them. I think I have a picture where you can see that. But definitely Gore-Tex gloves came on afterwards when you were on the boat because you got cold pretty quick. Nick talked me into buying these boots, and it was a fantastic investment. I got them in Ennis. They're regular kind of fishing boots, but they're kind of oversized, and they have a built-in sock. Highly recommend them if you're in Ireland and you want to walk around outside. They're unbelievably robust and warm. And they also, because they were big, allowed me to wear my socks at the top there. He recommended 9 mil socks. Couldn't find them anywhere, so I ended up with 3 mil ones, but I never got cold. And I used spearfishing fins. No need to do that, but I just decided I'd bring them. They're a bit bigger to pack, but you could really use anything. I think a fin that you put a sock on is best. And I already mentioned we needed crampons. Next time I would use better quality crampons. I got the ones in Lidl and they broke before the week was over. That's Mike from Kerry Sabacco Club. He looked a lot like me. So that's a picture of basically what I look like, the same, except he's a bit thinner, let's be honest, and younger. And that's myself and Nick in the water.
He's not 50 anyway.
What's that?
He's not 50.
He's not 50, no. No. But that is me there. And the three lads on the boat. There were days where it was just me in the water. I didn't want to get out. I spent as much time as possible. And Nick would let me, but he was always protected as well. And sometimes when Nick said it was time to get in the boat, it was time to get in the boat. Or when it was time not to get out of the boat, you had to listen to Nick because it was always about the safety. He was really good. Yeah, he's a champ. I can't fault him. And that's Lionel French in the background there. Two lads were great. And Mike's trying to keep warm there. It looks like Lionel's about to get in the water and his son has his head down. So you can work that out yourselves. It can be a long day on the water if you're not inclined and get seasick. So be careful. So it was all snorkeling. I know I haven't mentioned this yet, I suppose, but no, we had one focus light. You can see Mike has a focus light there down on the left or in the upper right. But I pretty much didn't turn mine on. I didn't bother with it. I just used natural light and no strobes. And it was all your own finning, right? And your own breath hold if you wanted to get underwater. But most of the time, you didn't need to duck dive for this stuff. You wanted to be near the surface anyway. And by the time you actually got to where the orcas or the humpbacks were, you were too wrecked to duck dive. So, you know, but we did one anyway. Another shot of Nick on the boat. So I have one section just on fishing. This is kind of short, but it was amazing just looking at the tops activity, you know, all the fishing that was going on. Small fishing boats like this, one or two crew, you know, doing their work. It was pretty impressive. It was pretty amazing. I have my settings there, ISO 1600, 6.3 and a 500 speed. I think that's probably Diarmid's lens again. So it's quite a distance away. And I'm zoomed in. This was a morning shot, so beautiful light and lots of birds filling up the scene. During the morning, we were watching just all this activity with the fishermen collecting their catch, you know, and your man is going out on a punt there and the orcas are right there. I don't know if they're waiting for him to fall in the water or the herring to fall out of the net, but they were constant hanging around the nets. It was really interesting. So I wanted to get another one where the your man is on the punt trying to do his work and the orca is right behind, kind of tracking him. This was one of the processing ships. So they are massive. You can't even, I had tried to get a wide angle shot of them sideways and it filled the frame. It was so big, like, and they would come over to one of those little fishing boats and then hoover up the fish out of the net until it was empty. And it would only take minutes, if not seconds. And then they would move on to the next one and the next one and the next one. There might be a dozen of those small fishing boats all kind of hanging out together. The processing boat would do its work and then it would be off, right? It was pretty amazing to see. This is what it looked like from a drone shot overhead. It was pretty amazing. You can kind of see the dense picture of the fish in the middle. And then over the side would be whatever processing they were doing, this pumping out of water. Now I just missed the actual gush of water, but this was kind of the aftermath. All these fish scales, right, in the water is pretty amazing to watch it. And a good few fish got away from the nets that day when we were watching the fishermen processing in the nets, and they'd be on the surface like this, kind of not dying, not dead, but they were quite alive, but they just weren't fishing, they weren't swimming again. So Nick had a gaff with a nail in it. You just go over and fuck and just pull a fish out. The boys slagged me once because one time I was doing it, it fell off the nail, and they would not stop abusing me about that. I didn't mention that at the dive show, but I'll say it today. So our refrigerator looked a lot like that, right? Sometimes we were too busy. That particular day, we were in a hurry, So we put the whole fish in the thing and gutted it later. But most of the time we cleaned it as soon as we got back. Gear wise for camera, I packed a whole suitcase just with camera gear. So I had my mini foldable DJI drone, which I didn't use too much of. I had one focus light, which I didn't use too much of. My Nauticam housing with the big dome, and I used the Sony A7 R2 mirrorless. And my default lens is the bottom left, the 1635 Sony. I got a loan from Andy of his 815 mil fisheye, but I didn't find a lot of times to get to use it. There was a couple times on the boat there that interior shot was one of them, but it just wasn't bright enough underwater for it, and it didn't go great with my housing either. So I owe him one for loaning me that though. The night shot was the 20 mil Sigma that Dearman loaned me, and then that's the big Canon that he gave me. It's another Sigma lens. Oh yeah, and of course, can't forget the GoPro and the selfie stick. I had two selfie sticks, one longer than the other, but they're definitely fantastic to use. And that's what my rig looked like. Okay, so a bit more photos, and we're nearly at the end here. So when you're out there kind of swimming around, sometimes you're swimming through bits of fish that have just been eaten, and your head kind of goes, what am I doing, right? What am I doing? But the whole time you're like, maybe I'm going to get lucky and actually watch them feeding. And this particular set of images is one particular day. It was about maybe 4 or 5 minutes in total time, but I got quite lucky. We saw kind of at the surface a bunch of birds. And if you can see, I both have a whale, a humpback in this shot, the mountains, and over there on the lower left is an orca. It's not a great shot, but to me, it's fantastic because it's a great memory, and it's a split shot, which I love. But we saw all these birds. Myself and Mike were in the water, and we started finning towards this action, right? Now, we had to have Nick kind of, driving the boats, and there's ribs and everything kind of all heading towards this action. And you're like, it's as dark as it looks here. So my little head with my hood on, looks like a little dark football at the top of the water. So it's risky, but we started swimming towards that, and Nick kept an eye on us. And we knew if there were birds, there had to be fish and maybe everything else. So Nick was watching us, and next thing I come across this school of herring, right? And it was just this giant ball. Now we see the mackerel in Ireland, right? And it can be quite magical when you see them, and if you're lucky enough to be actually in one, but you're not really thinking about the mackerel as being food for something bigger than you. You're thinking about maybe the fishermen, and they're over by the cliffs, so you're okay. At one point, I was like trying to get a picture of the herring, because Nick had in my mind, they're really hard to photograph because they're so fast moving, and it gets really blurry. And I said, I'll try and get a good shot. But then I kind of realized, hey, I'm in the food here. What am I doing? So I actually started thinning away from the school, right? But not before I got to see what the orcas do. They come from below, right? And they're kind of getting all the herring, gathering them together into this big ball. And then they just whip in, spin around, hit their tail, stun one of the fish, and then go back around and like you were slurping up something with a straw. It just goes right in their mouth, right? It was amazing to watch it, amazing. And it was only a few seconds, and I didn't get it on video, but I have to describe it for you. So while this action was happening with the orcas, these are all in sequence. The very next thing I could hear out of the top of my ear, because I was still on the surface, was somebody shouting, "Whale," right? And basically what happens, and Nick had described this to us before this, was the orcas are gathering all the herring together into this ball, and they're trying to herd them into shallower and shallower water so that they can then pick them off. But the humpbacks are watching the orcas do all this work, and then they go real clever from the bottom, and they come up and just do this big gulp and try and swallow them all. And that's actually what happened there. That wave on the right is the whale starting to dive towards the big school of fish. So in the shot I got, it's quite grainy in the PowerPoint, but that's the orca bursting through the ball of fish, and sorry, the humpback bursting through the ball of fish, and the orca circling around. And if you look at the one on the top left, he does that same thing again. Or for me, he's looking at the whale going, "Hey man, that was our dinner. What are you doing?" Like, and that was the bull. So that's that series of shots there together. That's the order that it happened in. Now I have 40 more of those shots in between, right? But I just picked out these 6. And that's that same bull that gave the orca that look. He looks small, or sorry, he gave the humpback the look. He looks small when you see him next to the pool of fish and the humpback, but he was not small. He was a big fella. And this is a series showing you that same action. So the orca is traveling and diving on the left-hand side, and then I'm just watching the bull head away. And the very last shot on the right, you can see the tail of the humpback disappearing. So I had this book at the show. I picked this up off of Aidan Rickardson. I got to see him in the shop one day, and I also saw him on the water. He's a scientist and he's local, and he'll be tagging these guys, and he's all about preservation, but he's an unbelievable photographer. Google Aidan Rickardson and you will see just some absolutely stunning images. And he has them at night, during the day. He has split shots. He has stuff that's just unbelievably, your imagination opens up when you see what is possible, right? Just incredible. Very hard to get the book though. They don't seem to sell it on like Amazon or something like that. It's kind of local bookshop. So
there's awesome pictures in it, isn't there?
Oh, it's unbelievable, unbelievable. I can give somebody a loan of that at some point, but I've only got my 1 copy, and I think it's really fantastic. So a couple more shots of kind of just a few here. This is actually this is the end of the talk, right? And it's more related to kind of the news that was announced about the protection of the basking sharks in Ireland, right? So all this kind of weighed up on our minds before we went over. There was Facebook groups, and there was lots of debate about people shouldn't get in water with these creatures at all, right? There's lots of Facebook opinions, you know. I didn't get involved in any of that debate. You know, there's people who make a living there taking boatloads of people and giving them ski goggles, as you can see, and they can get as close as they want to these whales. Those boats are probably not hopping in the water, but there's other ones where they're actually, you know, trying to hop out of the water. I think it was great that we did a code of conduct. So I got a copy of that off of them before the show, and I wanted to include it in the show. I thought this was really great, and I know every one of you guys has read it, right? Maintain the 4 meters distance from any given shark. You know, don't try and touch them, right? And try and, you know, be responsible, and don't surround them with all your divers. Like, you know, be together. These are all things that I feel like as divers we would just do as common sense, but it's good that they're written in black and white for people to kind of consume. And in fact, at the show, who said it to me? Shirley Baker. What about suntan lotion? You know, did they have anything in the rules about that? And I don't think I saw anything about suntan lotion, but it's also a good suggestion. Right now in Ireland, we might not have too much that on our hands, but like, absolutely, you don't want to be harming, you know, the sharks with oils coming off of your body and stuff like that. So that probably should get added, but those kind of things. So like, for me, our community of divers in Ireland are already kind of this way thinking, and we shouldn't think of ourselves as you know, anything other than people who can spread the word and the message to people who just don't know, right? But anyway, they talk about avoiding flash photography. So yeah, that makes sense to me. And what else? For the boat drivers, reducing the speed, we would do that anyway. Avoid sudden changes of direction. Stay within 50 meters. Engine in neutral within 50 meters, sorry. And do not approach the sharks, let them pass you. And that was a big thing that the Facebook group, I think, really had a problem with. There was a lot of these kind of boats, and I'm not singling these two out, I'm just using this as an example, where they were trying to drive in the path of the whales so that they could have people jump over the side, get in the water, and get that shot, rather than try and fin towards them, right? You're supposed to drive the boat alongside the direction that the whales are traveling and not tee them, not try and get in front of them, and I think that makes sense. The bull will get between the family and the boat anyway if he feels like there's a problem. And you saw what I did with the GoPro, just dropping it. They're very comfortable when they're not threatened. So that's it. That's the last picture. I don't know how long I took. Thanks everybody for joining. Any questions, any comments, any thoughts?
Yeah, those ribs, did they come out from the same pier you came from?
Yes, they did, but not from the fishing village, from the other side.
And
they were in the marina. They were
day trippers to the place, was
it? I think so, yeah. So I like on our way home on the fast ferry, I met some Americans who were over from California, and I kind of started chatting to them. I was like, oh, what were you up to? And I showed them some of my pictures, of course, right? Delighted with myself. And they had paid a lot of money for one weekend to come out, and they only got one day on the boat. So like we were there a week and we only got 4 days on the water. There was a whole day where we didn't even get in the water, right? We had more time on our hands, so we could be, in my mind, more conscious and more protective of when we did things. And Nick never let us break any rules. Whereas if you were under time pressure and you have a bad weather day and it's only 2 days of a weekend, there's a lot more pressure on those day trippers to achieve something. And we've all seen, probably on foreign holidays, I saw somebody being dragged off the Thistlegorm, which felt almost like they were walking a dog, right? An instructor taking a diver who didn't really belong there by the hand, right? And they probably paid a lot of money for that privilege. So yeah, to me, the behavior that we did was very different to the stuff that they were, giving out about on Facebook, for example. Good question.
Were any of them tagged, Mike, that you could see? No.
I didn't notice at all any tags, but they probably were, yeah. And they were tagging some of the days when I was in the water. I saw them.
And Mike, would you have had any trouble with the lenses getting fogged up or anything like that?
Luckily, no. I think it was like, I have trouble if I drive to the pool in UL with my lens and then bring it in from the cold of the car, the boot, to the pool, and it heats up real quick. But it only lasts about 5 minutes. So we were hours on the boat, so I think all the gear got acclimatized. Do you know what I mean? Good question, though. Probably should have brought stuff to make sure that didn't happen inside the gear, but I didn't. And no batteries, they have a problem when batteries go cold and things like that, but we didn't have any trouble. We were relatively lucky with the weather. Hello, Shirley Baker.
Hi, Mike, how are you?
Not too bad.
You have a young listener here, Mike. She wants to know, how many babies did you see?
Well, with every family, we saw one baby. It was pretty amazing. Every time we saw a family, almost, I think there was a baby. But no twins.
No twins.
No twins. Just one baby on its own.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks for coming. My battery is dying here, wouldn't you know? And that might be a good thing. So I'm going to stop the recording now.